I met David when I was 20-4 and he was everything I thought I wanted. He was calm where I was anxious, steady where I was scattered, and his family seemed like the kind of close-knit unit I'd always dreamed of having. My own parents had divorced when I was young and my relationship with them was polite but distant. So when David's mom Patricia hugged me, the first time we met and told me I was already part of the family, I actually cried in the car on the way home. His sister Lauren was warm too, always texting me separately from the family group chat to ask how I was doing or to send me recipes she thought I'd like. We got married 2 years later in a small ceremony at Patricia's house, and I felt like I'd finally found the family I was supposed to have all along. David worked in IT security and made good money, and I was a freelance graphic designer working from home. We bought a small house in the suburbs about 20 minutes from Patricia's place, and for the first 3 years everything was perfect. We had dinner at his mom's house every Sunday. Lauren would come over on Wednesdays to watch reality TV with me, and David and I talked about starting a family. When I got pregnant with Emma, Patricia cried and said she'd been praying for this and that she couldn't wait to be a grandmother. She threw me a baby shower that must have cost thousands of dollars and invited everyone she knew. And Lauren helped me set up the nursery and bought us this expensive smart baby monitor that connected to an app on my phone. I remember thinking I was the luckiest woman alive. Emma was born in March and she was perfect. David was a good dad from day one, getting up with her at night and changing diapers without complaint. And Patricia came over almost every day to help with whatever I needed. She'd hold Emma while I showered or made lunch, and she always brought groceries or meal-prepped dinners for us. Lauren came by a few times a week too and loved taking a million photos of Emma for Instagram. Everything felt normal and I was exhausted but happy in that new mom way where you're running on no sleep, but you don't even care because you have this perfect tiny person. David's family was so involved and so helpful that I never questioned any of it. The first weird thing happened when Emma was about 2 months old. I got an email from my bank saying that I'd requested a new debit card and it would arrive in 5 to 7 business days. I hadn't requested a new card. I called the bank and the woman on the phone told me that I called 2 days ago and said I'd lost my card and needed a replacement. I told her I definitely hadn't called and that I still had my card in my wallet. She put me on hold for a long time and then came back and said that according to their system the call had gone through their voice verification system and matched my voice print. I didn't even know my bank had voice verification. She said someone had called claiming to be me and had answered the security questions correctly and had passed the voice check. I felt this cold spike of fear, but I pushed it down and told her to cancel the replacement card and flag my account. She didn't. I hung up feeling unsettled, but I convinced myself it was just some kind of glitch or maybe someone who sounded like me had gotten my information somehow. I mentioned it to David that night and he frowned and asked if I was sure I hadn't called the bank and forgotten. I told him I was positive and he said it was probably just a scammer who'd got unlucky with my info and that I should change all my passwords. I did, but the whole thing stayed in the back of my mind like a splinter I couldn't dig out. 2 weeks later, I got a text message from my phone carrier saying my account PIN had been changed. I hadn't changed it. I called them immediately and the person on the phone told me that someone had verified their identity using my facial recognition through their app and had changed the PIN. I started to panic and told them I hadn't done that and they reset everything and added extra security notes to my account. This time when I told David, he got really serious and said I probably had malware on my phone and that I should factory reset it. He even offered to do it for me that night and he spent an hour backing everything up and wiping my phone clean. Nothing happened for about a month after that and I started to relax. Emma was getting bigger and sleeping better and life felt manageable again. Patricia was still coming over all the time and she'd started talking about how she wanted to set up a college fund for Anna and asking me about our financial planning. She kept saying that David had told her we were doing well, but that she wanted to help and maybe we should sit down with a financial advisor she knew. I thought it was sweet, but David got annoyed when I mentioned it and said his mom was being pushy and that our finances were none of her business. I dropped it, but I noticed that Patricia kept bringing it up. Always when David wasn't around. Always asking about our accounts and our savings and whether we had life insurance. Then in June, I got a notification on my phone that my face had been added to a new device on my Apple account. I was sitting in the nursery feeding Emma when it popped up and I stared at it for a full minute trying to understand what it meant. I hadn't added my face to any new device. I immediately checked my Apple account and saw that there was an iPad listed under my devices that I didn't recognize. The name was something generic like iPad Pro with a string of numbers in the location, showed it had last been used at an address I didn't know. I removed it from my account and changed my password and security questions, and then I sat there feeling like the walls were closing in. Someone had my face. Someone had used my face to unlock something, and I had no idea how that was even possible. I called David at work and I sounded hysterical. But I told him what happened and he came home early. He looked at my phone and at the device list and his face went really pale. He asked me if I'd been to that address and I said I'd never even heard of that street. He said we needed to call the police and report identity theft. But then he stopped and said maybe we should wait and see if anything else happened because the police probably wouldn't do anything about one weird device. I wanted to call them anyway, but he convinced me to wait and said he'd reach out to some people he knew in cybercustody to see if they could figure out what was going on. That night Patricia came over unannounced with dinner and when I tried to tell her what happened she waved it off and said that tech stuff always glitch and that I was probably just stressed from being a new mom. David agreed with her and said I should try to relax and not worry about it. But I couldn't stop worrying about it because things kept happening. Small things at first. I'd find apps on my phone that I didn't remember downloading. My location services would be turned on when I knew I'd turned them off. My bank app would be logged out randomly. I started keeping a list on paper, hidden in the bottom of my dresser drawer, of every weird thing that happened. David kept saying I was being paranoid and that new moms were always anxious and that maybe I should talk to my doctor about postpartum anxiety. Patricia agreed every time he said it and started leaving pamphlets about postpartum depression on my kitchen counter. I wasn't depressed. I wasn't anxious in that way. Something was actually happening, and no one would believe me. In July, I got a credit alert that someone had tried to open a store credit card in my name at a furniture store 2 hours away. The application was denied because of a credit freeze I'd put on my accounts after the bank card incident. But it meant someone had tried. Someone had my social security number and my date of birth and enough information to apply for credit. I called David immediately and this time he couldn't brush it off. He said we needed to file a police report and contact the credit bureaus and freeze everything. We spent the entire weekend on the phone with various agencies and banks and credit companies and, by the end of it, I felt violated and exhausted. David held me that night and promised we'd figure out who was doing this and make them pay. I believed him because I needed to believe him. The police report went nowhere. The officer who took my statement said identity theft was hard to investigate and that unless there was significant financial damage, there wasn't much they could do. He told me to monitor my accounts and keep records of everything and to call back if anything else happened. David seemed frustrated by that, but also weirdly relieved. And when I asked him if we should hire a private investigator or something, he said that would be a waste of money and that we should just be more careful. Patricia came over that night with Lauren and they both hugged me and said how terrible it must be to feel unsafe like this. Lauren even offered to help me go through all my accounts and make sure everything was secure. She sat with me for 3 hours that night clicking through every password and every security setting, and I remember feeling grateful that she cared so much. 2 weeks later, I was going through the mail and found a statement for a credit card I didn't have. It was addressed to me at our house. but it was for a Capital One card I'd never applied for. My hands were shaking as I opened it and saw a balance of $12,000. The charges were all from the last 3 months. Furniture stores, electronic stores, luxury retailers, all in cities I'd never been to. I called the number on the statement and, after an hour on hold, they told me that the card had been opened in April using my information and that all the voice verifications had passed and that there was even a video verification on file where someone who looked like me had held up my ID to a webcam. I told them it wasn't me and that I needed to see the video. They said they'd open a fraud investigation and send me the paperwork, but that it could take up to 90 days. I was shaking so hard I could barely hold the phone. David was at work and Dema was napping and I just sat on the kitchen floor staring at that credit card statement. Someone who looked like me had verified themselves on video. Someone who had my face. I thought about deep fakes and face swapping and all the technology David had told me about before. And then I thought about how many photos of me existed online and on social media and in family group chats. I went upstairs and locked myself in the bathroom and pulled up my Instagram. I scrolled back through 3 years of photos. Hundreds of pictures of my face from every angle, in every kind of lighting. My Facebook had even more. My LinkedIn had professional headshots. Anyone could have taken those photos and fed them into some kind of AI program and created a digital version of me. When David got home, I showed him the credit card statement and he went completely white. He sat down at the kitchen table and stared at it for a long time without saying anything. Then he asked me if I was absolutely sure I hadn't opened the card and forgotten about it. I almost screamed. I told him there was no way I would open a credit card and charge $12,000 and forget about it. And he said he had to ask because sometimes postpartum hormones made women do strange things. I left the room because if I'd stayed I would have thrown something at him. Patricia called 20 minutes later, like she somehow knew we'd been fighting, and asked if she could come over. David said yes before I could say no. She arrived with dinner and wine in this sad, concerned look on her face. She kept touching my arm and asking if I was okay and saying that she knew this must be so hard on me. Lauren came too and they both sat with me on the couch while David put Emma to bed. And they asked me to walk them through everything that had happened. I told them about the credit card and the video verification and how scared I was that someone had my face. And Patricia squeezed my hand and said that sometimes when we're under a lot of stress our memories aren't as reliable as we think. She said she wasn't trying to upset me, but that maybe I should consider the possibility that I'd done some of these things and forgotten. Lauren nodded and said that sleep deprivation could cause all kinds of memory problems and that she'd read articles about moms who'd done things during those early months that they had no recollection of later. I pulled my hand away and told them I knew what I hadn't done. Patricia's face got very serious and she said she was worried about me and that maybe I needed to talk to someone professional. She said postpartum psychosis was a real thing and that it could make women believe things that weren't true. I stood up and told her I wasn't psychotic and that something was actually happening to me. David came downstairs right then and asked what was going on. And Patricia told him that she thought I needed help and that she was concerned for Emma's safety if I was having a break from reality. I felt like I'd been slapped. David looked at me with this expression I'd never seen before, like he was trying to decide if his mother was right. And I walked out of the room and locked myself in the bedroom. They stayed for another hour and I could hear them talking in low voices downstairs. When they finally left, David came upstairs and tried to talk to me. He said his mom meant well and that maybe I should at least talk to my doctor about how I was feeling. I told him I was feeling like my identity was being stolen and no one believed me. He sighed and said that wasn't what he meant and that he just wanted me to be okay. We didn't talk for the rest of the night and I lay awake until 3 in the morning staring at the ceiling and trying to figure out what to do next. The fraud investigation for the credit card took 6 weeks, and in that time, 3 more cards were opened in my name. Each time I caught them faster because I was monitoring my credit hourly. And each time I had to file a new police report and a new fraud claim and sit on hold for hours with different banks. The police started treating me like I was wasting their time. The second officer who took my statement suggested that maybe my husband was opening the cards and I should look into marriage counseling. I told him my husband worked in cybersecurity and made plenty of money and had no reason to steal from me. And the officer just shrugged and said that money problems came up in the best marriages. David started staying late at work. He said he was working on a big project, but when I asked him about it, he was vague and dismissive. Patricia kept coming over uninvited and bringing meals and offering to watch Emma so I could rest. She started asking me questions about my childhood and my mental health history and whether anyone in my family had ever been diagnosed with anything. I asked her why she wanted to know, and she said she was just trying to understand what I was going through. Lauren started pulling away, canceling plans with me, and not responding to my texts as quickly. When I asked her if everything was okay, she said she was just busy with work, but her tone was off, like she was being careful about what she said to me. I felt like I was going crazy, except I knew I wasn't. I knew something real was happening, and I knew that no one believed me, and I knew that I had to find proof. I started going through David's things when he was at work. His laptop was password protected, but his iPad wasn't, and I found it in his car one day when I was looking for Emma's pacifier. I took it inside while she was napping and I went through everything. His emails were mostly work stuff and boring conversations with his friends about sports and video games. His texts with his mom were normal. His texts with Lauren were normal. There was nothing suspicious until I found a folder in his photos that was labeled Tax Documents 2023, which seemed weird because we kept all our tax stuff in a filing cabinet in the office. I opened the folder and my stomach dropped. There were hundreds of photos of me. Not normal photos like the ones we took together or that I posted online. These were screenshots of my face from videos. Close-ups of my eyes and nose and mouth from different angles. Pictures of my hands with my fingers spread out like someone was trying to capture my fingerprints. Photos of documents with my signature on them. There were pictures of my driver's license front and back, my social security card, my birth certificate, my passport. There were photos I didn't even remember being taken. Shots of me sleeping or sitting on the couch, staring at my phone or holding Emma. I felt like I was going to throw up. I took pictures of everything with my phone, my hands shaking so badly, I had to retake half of them because they were blurry. Then I closed the folder and put the iPad back exactly where I'd found it. I went upstairs and sat in the nursery with Emmett and tried to breathe normally. My husband had been collecting photos of me like some kind of surveillance file. My husband, who I trusted completely and who I'd built a life with and who was the father of my child. I didn't understand why he would need all those photos unless he was the one stealing my identity. But that didn't make sense because he made more money than I did and he had access to all our accounts anyway. Unless it wasn't about money. Unless it was about something else entirely. That night I pretended everything was fine. I made dinner and smiled and asked David about his day and didn't mention the iPad at all. He seemed relieved that I wasn't talking about the identity theft anymore, and he was more affectionate than he'd been in weeks. He kissed me goodnight and fell asleep immediately, and I lay next to him feeling like I was in bed with a stranger. The next morning after he left for work, I called a lawyer. I didn't know what kind of lawyer I needed, but I found one who specialized in identity theft and fraud and made an appointment for the following week. I told Patricia I had a doctor's appointment and asked if she could watch Emma, and she said of course and seemed happy that I was finally taking care of myself. The lawyer's name was Rebecca Chen and she was younger than I expected, maybe in her early 30s. with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense way of talking. I showed her everything. All the credit card statements, all the fraud alerts, all the police reports. And then I showed her the photos I'd taken of David's iPad. She looked at them for a long time without saying anything, and then she asked me if I considered that my husband might be involved. I said I had, but that I didn't understand why he would do this. She said that in her experience, identity theft within families was usually about control or about setting someone up for something bigger. She asked if David had ever tried to get me to sign any documents I didn't understand, or if he'd ever suggested I give him power of attorney or access to accounts I didn't share with him. I thought about it and realized that he'd been asking me to add him to my business account for months, saying it would make things easier for tax purposes. But I kept putting it off. Rebecca told me I needed to secure everything immediately. She gave me a list of things to do: open a new bank account at a different bank that no one knew about, move my money there, get a new phone with a new number and don't tell anyone, document everything, and consider that I might need to leave if things escalated. She also said I should contact the FBI because identity theft at this level, especially with biometric data, was a federal crime. I felt like I was in a movie. This couldn't be my real life. This couldn't be my husband and his family. But Rebecca looked at me very seriously and said that she'd seen cases like this before and that they usually got worse before they got better. She said the fact that they were taking photos of me while I slept was a massive red flag and that I needed to assume I was being surveilled. I left her office feeling like the ground had disappeared beneath my feet. I picked up Emma from Patricia's house and tried to act normal, but Patricia kept looking at me strangely and asking if the doctor had said anything concerning. I told her everything was fine and that I just needed to take some vitamins and get more sleep. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes, and she said she was glad I was finally listening to reason. When David got home that night, I watched him with Emma and tried to see if there was anything different about him. Any sign that he was capable of what I was starting to suspect. But he just seemed like David. He made silly faces at Emma and heated up leftovers for dinner and asked if I wanted to watch a movie. I said yes, and we sat on the couch together, and I felt completely alone. Over the next week, I did everything Rebecca told me to do. I opened a new account at a credit union across town and slowly started transferring money from our joint account in small amounts that wouldn't trigger any alerts. I bought a new phone with cash and set it up with a new number and only gave it to Rebecca. I started taking Emma on longer walks, and I'd go to coffee shops with free Wi-Fi and use their internet to check my accounts instead of using our home network. I stopped telling David or Patricia or Lauren anything real about where I was going or what I was doing. I said I had errands or doctor's appointments, or that I just needed to get out of the house. They seemed satisfied with that at first, but then Patricia started asking more questions about where exactly I was going and how long I'd be gone. One afternoon, I came home from running errands and found Patricia in my bedroom. She was standing in front of my dresser and she jumped when I walked in. She said she'd been looking for a phone charger and thought I might have an extra one upstairs. I didn't believe her because there were 3 chargers plugged in downstairs and she knew that. I asked her to leave and she got this hurt look on her face and said she was just trying to help and that I seemed really stressed lately. After she left, I checked my dresser, and the drawer where I'd been keeping my handwritten list of all the weird things that had happened was slightly open. I kept the list in a specific position under some folded shirts and it had been moved. She'd been going through my things. That night, David asked me if I'd done something to upset his mother. I asked what he meant and he said Patricia had called him crying, saying that I'd accused her of snooping and that I'd been really cold to her. I told him I'd found her in our bedroom going through my dresser and that I had every right to ask her to leave. He said she'd told him she was looking for a charger and that I was being paranoid again. I asked him why his mother needed to look for a charger in my dresser, and he said I was twisting everything to fit my narrative, that everyone was out to get me. We fought for an hour and he said things he'd never said before. That I was being a bad mother because I was so obsessed with this identity theft thing. That I was pushing away the only people who cared about me. That I needed professional help. I locked myself in the bathroom and called Rebecca on my secret phone. She told me to install security cameras in my house without telling anyone. She recommended ones that uploaded to the cloud automatically, so even if someone found them and destroyed them, the footage would be saved. I ordered them that night and had them shipped to a P.O. box I'd opened the week before. When they arrived, I installed them myself in the bedroom, the living room, the nursery, and the office, all hidden in places that looked like normal objects. A clock, a picture frame, a baby monitor, a shelf decoration. I felt insane doing it, but Rebecca had said I needed evidence and this was the only way to get it. The cameras paid off within 3 days. I was out with Emma at a Mommy Minus and Minus Me class when I got a motion alert on my phone from the bedroom camera. I opened the app and watched Liv as Patricia let herself into my house with a key I didn't know she had. She went straight upstairs to the bedroom and opened my dresser drawer and took out the list I'd been keeping. She photographed every page with her phone and then put it back. But not in the exact same spot because she didn't know I'd been tracking its position. Then she went to the office and turned on my computer. I watched her try several passwords before getting in, which meant she'd been watching me type my password at some point and had memorized it. She opened my email and scrolled through it, then opened my banking apps and took screenshots of everything. I felt like I was watching a horror movie, except it was my real life and that was my husband's mother and she was in my house going through my private information. She was there for almost an hour. She went through every room including the nursery, looking under furniture and in closets and through drawers. She found the new phone I'd hidden in a box of tampons under the bathroom sink and she turned it on and scrolled through it. But I'd been careful not to save Rebecca's number or any of my banking info on it, so there was nothing incriminating for her to find. She took photos of the phone anyway, and then put it back and left. The whole time she had this calm expression on her face, like she did this sort of thing every day. I saved all the footage and sent it to Rebecca immediately. She called me back within 10 minutes and said this was serious and that I needed to contact the FBI today, not next week. She said what Patricia was doing was criminal and that combined with the identity theft and the biometric fraud, we had enough to open an investigation. She gave me the name and number of an agent she'd worked with before on a similar case and told me to call him from my secret phone and not to go back home until I'd spoken to him. I sat in my car outside the mommy class with him, sleeping in her car seat, and called the number. A man answered and said his name was Special Agent Marcus Webb and that Rebecca had already briefed him on my case and he'd like to meet with me as soon as possible. We met that afternoon at a coffee shop near the FBI field office. Agent Webb was in his 40s with gray hair and tired eyes and he spoke in this very measured way like he'd seen everything before. I showed him everything I had, all the documentation of the identity theft, all the photos from David's iPad, all the security footage of Patricia breaking into my house. He watched the footage twice and then asked me very detailed questions about my relationship with David and his family, about our finances, about what they might gain from stealing my identity. I said I didn't understand what they would gain because David made good money and his family wasn't struggling. Agent Webb said that often in cases like this, it wasn't about money in the traditional sense but about using someone's identity to commit other crimes or to set them up to take the fall for something bigger. He asked if David or his family had ever been involved in anything illegal that I knew about. I said no, but then I remembered that Patricia had declared bankruptcy about 10 years ago and that David's dad had died suddenly when David was in college and there had been some kind of investigation into his business dealings, but I didn't know the details. Agent Webb wrote all of that down and then he told me something that made my blood run cold. He said that they'd been investigating a fraud ring operating in our area for about 8 months. The ring was using stolen biometric data to open accounts, take out loans, and commit various types of financial fraud. And they'd been having trouble tracking down who was running it because the operation was sophisticated, and the people involved were tech-savvy. He said based on what I'd shown him, it was possible that my husband's family was part of this ring and that I was their victim. I asked him why they would do this to me specifically, and he said that the best victims for this type of fraud were people who trusted the perpetrators completely and who had good credit and no criminal history. I checked all those boxes. He also said that having a new baby made me vulnerable because I was tired and distracted and less likely to notice small discrepancies until it was too late. He asked if I'd be willing to work with the FBI to build a case against them, and I said yes immediately. He told me that it would be difficult and potentially dangerous and that I'd need to continue acting normal around them, while wearing a wire and documenting everything. He said they'd need hard evidence of the fraud being committed, and ideally they'd need to catch them in the act. We spent the next 2 hours going over a plan. Agent Webb said he'd get approval to open an official investigation and assign additional agents to my case. He'd have someone install professional -grade surveillance equipment in my house and in my car. And he'd give me a wire to wear during family gatherings. He told me not to confront David or Patricia or Lauren about anything I'd discovered and to act like I was giving up on the identity theft investigation. He said I should even tell them that maybe they were right and that I'd been stressed and not thinking clearly. It would lower their guard and make them more likely to slip up. He also assigned a protection detail to follow me discreetly when I left the house in case things escalated. I went home that evening and David was already there with Emma. He'd picked her up from Patricia's and made dinner and he seemed to be in a good mood. He said his mom had told him I'd dropped Emma off that morning and seemed more like myself and he was glad I was feeling better. I forced myself to smile and say that I'd been thinking about what everyone had been saying and that maybe I had been too stressed and paranoid. He looked so relieved and he hugged me and said he was proud of me for recognizing that. We had a nice dinner and I played with Emma and pretended that my world wasn't imploding. That night in bed, David reached for me and I let him even though my skin crawled. The FBI moved fast. Within 2 days, they had cameras and audio equipment installed throughout the house, so small and hidden that even I couldn't find them all. Agent Webb gave me a wire that looked like a normal necklace and told me to wear it any time I was around David's family. He also cloned my phone so they could monitor any attempts to access it remotely and track any surveillance software that might be installed on it. They found 3 separate spyware programs on my original phone that had been installed over the past 6 months. One of them was recording my calls and texts. Another was tracking my location. And the third was capturing screenshots every 5 minutes. Agent Webb said the programs were sophisticated and would have required physical access to my phone to install, which meant someone in my house had done it. I thought about all the times I left my phone sitting on the counter or charging in the bedroom or in my purse that I'd left hanging by the door. I thought about Patricia coming over almost every day and Lauren visiting multiple times a week and David having unlimited access to everything I owned. Any of them could have done it. All of them probably had. Agent Webb said the spyware was sending data to an encrypted server and they were working on tracing it. But these things took time. In the meantime, I needed to keep using the phone like normal so they didn't know I was onto them. He set up the new phone to mirror my old one so I could communicate with him securely while making it look like I was still using the compromised device. Patricia invited us over for Sunday dinner that weekend and Agent Webb told me this was a good opportunity to gather intel. He coached me on what to talk about and what questions to ask and reminded me to act natural and slightly defeated, like I'd accepted that the identity theft was probably my fault somehow. David and I drove over with Emma and the whole way there I had to remind myself to breathe normally. Patricia answered the door with a huge smile and took Emma from my arms immediately, cooing about how big she was getting. Lauren was already there and she hugged me and said she was glad I was doing better. They'd clearly all talked about me behind my back and decided on this narrative that I'd had some kind of breakdown and was now recovering. Dinner was perfectly normal on the surface. Patricia had made pot roast and mashed potatoes, and we all sat around the table making small talk about work and the weather on Dima's sleep schedule. But I was wearing the wire and I was paying attention to everything, and I started noticing things I'd never noticed before. Patricia kept steering the conversation back to my finances, asking if we'd decided what to do about saving for Emma's college and whether we'd looked into that financial advisor she'd recommended. Lauren mentioned that she'd been thinking about buying a new car and asked if I knew how good my credit was and whether I'd be willing to co-sign for her if she needed it. David changed the subject both times, but in a way that felt protective of them rather than protective of me. After dinner, Patricia asked if she could talk to me privately, and we went into the kitchen while David and Lawrence stayed in the dining room with Emma. Patricia loaded the dishwasher and told me she wanted to apologize for making me feel bad about being stressed. She said she understood that being a new mom was hard and that she hadn't meant to imply I was crazy. Then she asked me directly if I'd talked to anyone about the identity theft, like a lawyer or a detective or anyone like that. I said no and that I'd decided everyone was probably right and I'd just been confused. She looked relieved and said that was good because sometimes these things resolve themselves and there was no point in getting authorities involved over what was probably just some random scammer. The way she said it made my skin prickle. She was making sure I wasn't pursuing it anymore. Over the next few weeks, I played the role perfectly. I stopped talking about the identity theft. I let Patricia come over whenever she wanted. I had coffee with Lauren and didn't ask her any hard questions. I acted like the obedient daughter minus law and wife who'd realized she was wrong and was now getting back to normal. And the whole time I was recording everything and reporting back to Agent Webb. The FBI had traced the server that my phone's spyware was sending data to, and they'd connected it to an address that was rented in Lauren's name. They'd also tracked the device that had been added to my Apple account and found it was registered to a fake identity, but the IP address it was using most frequently was Patricia's home Wi-Fi. Agent Webb told me they were building a comprehensive case, but they needed something concrete. Some smoking gun that would prove beyond doubt that they were using my biometric data to commit fraud. He said the photos on David's iPad were good, but they needed to catch them actually using my face or my voice or my fingerprints to access something they shouldn't have access to. He asked if I knew of any upcoming situations where they might try to use my identity, and I thought about it and realized that Patricia had been pushing hard for me to add her as an authorized user on my credit cards. She'd said it was so she could pick things up for Emma if I needed her to, but that I didn't have to give her a card, just add her to the account. I told Agent Webb and he said that was perfect and that I should agree to it and they'd monitor what happened next. I called Patricia the next day and told her I'd thought about what she'd said and I'd be happy to add her as an authorized user. She sounded thrilled and said I was such a good daughter minus law and that she'd never use it except for emergencies. I gave her all the information she needed and the credit card company said they'd send her card in the mail. Agent Webb had the FBI monitoring the account and waiting to see what she'd do with it. 2 weeks later, Patricia's card arrived and that same day, there was a charge for $3,000 at an electronics store in a city 2 hours away. Then another charge for $5,000 at a jewelry store. Then another for $2,000 at a department store. All in the same afternoon. All in places I'd never been. The FBI tracked her to each location using her cell-phone GPS and they had agents watching her. She wasn't using the physical card because it had just arrived that day. She was using my credit card number and my biometric data to make the purchases through the store's apps and websites. At the jewelry store, she'd gone in person, and when they'd asked for ID, she'd used some kind of fake ID with my information but her photo. And then she'd verified the purchase using a phone app that scanned her face but showed my name. The technology was sophisticated and clearly something they'd been using for a while. Agent Webb said this was exactly what they needed and that they were ready to move, but they wanted to wait a little longer to see how high up the operation went. He told me they'd been surveilling Patricia's house and they documented multiple people coming and going, who were known to be involved in identity theft and fraud operations. David's sister Lauren was there frequently and they'd observed her with equipment that appeared to be for creating fake IDs and cloning biometric data. They'd also observed David himself meeting with some of these individuals at coffee shops and parking lots, having conversations that appeared to be about business dealings. Agent Webb said it looked like the whole family was involved and that they weren't just stealing from me, but were likely using my identity as a template for creating multiple fake identities to sell to other criminals. I was their prototype. I asked Agent Webb when this was going to end and he said soon. He said they were coordinating with federal prosecutors and preparing arrest warrants for David, Patricia, and Lauren, along with several other individuals connected to the operation. He said I needed to be prepared for what was going to happen, because once they made arrests, my life would change completely. I'd need to testify. I'd need to get a divorce. I'd need to figure out custody of Emma. He asked if I had somewhere safe to go when everything went down and I realized I didn't. I had no family nearby and no friends who weren't connected to David's family somehow. Agent Webb said the FBI could arrange protective custody if needed, but that I should think about a longer term plan. I started looking for apartments in secret. I'd take Emma on drives and stop at complexes to pick up information, and I'd tour places while pretending to be out running errands. I found a small 2- bedroom about 30 minutes away and put down a deposit using money from my secret account. I didn't move anything there yet because I couldn't risk David noticing anything missing. But I had a place to go when everything exploded. I also met with a divorce attorney that Rebecca recommended and started filing paperwork. The attorney said that given the criminal charges David would be facing, I'd almost certainly get full custody of Emma, but that we should be prepared for his family to fight it anyway. Everything came to a head on a Wednesday morning in October. Agent Webb called me at 6 a.m. and said they were executing the warrants today and that I needed to take Emma and leave the house immediately. I packed a bag as quietly as I could while David was still sleeping, and I strapped Emma into her car seat and drove to a hotel the FBI had booked for me. At 9 a.m. Agent Webb called and said they'd arrested Patricia at her house and Lauren at her apartment and they were on their way to arrest David at his office. He said they also arrested 5 other individuals connected to the fraud ring and seized computers and phones and documents from all the locations. He said I should prepare for David to call me and try to explain or apologize and that I should not answer and should let everything go through my attorney. David called 30-7 times that day. He left voicemails that started out confused and then angry and then desperate. He said he didn't understand what was happening and that the FBI had arrested him at work in front of everyone and that he needed me to help him. He said his mom and sister had been arrested too and that they needed a lawyer and could I please call him back. Then the messages got darker. He said I'd set them up and betrayed the family and how could I do this to Emma's grandmother? He said I'd regret this and that he'd make sure I never saw Emma again. Agent Webb had warned me this would happen and told me to save all the messages as evidence. The news broke that evening. A local news station reported that the FBI had dismantled a major identity theft and fraud operation that had been running for over 2 years and had victimized dozens of people. They didn't name any of the suspects, but they said the operation had been sophisticated and had involved the use of stolen biometric data to commit financial crimes totaling over $2 million. I watched the broadcast in my hotel room with Emma asleep next to me and felt completely numb. My husband and his entire family had been running a criminal enterprise and I'd been their primary victim and had no idea until it was almost too late. The FBI released more information over the next few days. Patricia had been the ringleader and had recruited her children into the operation after her bankruptcy. They'd started small, using her friends and acquaintances as victims, but had grown more ambitious over time. When David met me and they realized I had good credit and no family nearby to notice discrepancies, I become their perfect target. They'd been planning it from the beginning. The baby shower, the helpful visits, the constant presence in my life. All of it had been about gaining access to me and my information. They'd been taking photos of my face since the day we met so they could build their database. The smart baby monitor Lauren had given me had a hidden camera in it that recorded me around the clock. Agent Webb showed me evidence they'd seized from Patricia's house. There were folders with my name on them containing hundreds of photos organized by angle and lighting. There were voice recordings of me talking on the phone and having conversations at family dinners. There were copies of my fingerprints lifted from glasses and plates and door handles. They'd been collecting this data for years and using it to create fake credentials in my name and in the names of dozens of other fake identities they'd generated using my biometric data as a base. They'd sold these identities online to other criminals who'd use them to open accounts, apply for loans, rent apartments, and commit various forms of fraud. I was just one person, but my identity had been fractured into pieces and scattered across dozens of criminal enterprises. The worst part was finding out how they'd planned to get rid of me. Agent Webb showed me documents they'd found on Patricia's computer that outlined a plan to have me declared mentally incompetent. They'd been building a case for months, documenting my paranoid behavior and my false accusations and gathering statements from David and Lauren and even some neighbors about how I'd been acting strangely. They'd found a psychiatrist who was willing to sign off on a mental health evaluation based on their documentation without ever meeting me. The plan was to get me committed to a psychiatric facility long enough to establish a pattern of mental instability, then use that to get David full custody of Emma. Once they had Emma manned, I was discredited. They'd continue using my identity while I was locked away, unable to prove anything. I threw up when Agent Webb told me that. I couldn't stop thinking about how close they'd come to succeeding. If I hadn't found those photos on David's iPad, if I hadn't trusted my gut and called a lawyer, if I hadn't fought back when everyone told me I was being paranoid, I'd be in a psychiatric ward right now and Emma would be with them. Agent Webb said I'd saved myself and possibly dozens of other potential victims by coming forward when I did. The legal process moved faster than I expected. David, Patricia, and Lauren were all charged with identity theft, wire fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, and a dozen other federal crimes. The evidence was overwhelming and their public defenders advised them to take plea deals. But Patricia refused. She wanted to go to trial and she wanted to testify that I'd been complicit in everything and had only turned on them when I gotten cold feet. Her lawyer tried to build a defense around the idea that I was a jilted wife seeking revenge. But the FBI had security footage of her breaking into my house. They had recordings of her coaching David and Lauren on how to use my biometric data. They had financial records showing money flowing from the fraudulent accounts to accounts in her name. The trial lasted 3 weeks and the jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before finding her guilty on all counts. David and Lauren took plea deals after that. David got 12 years in federal prison and Lauren got 8. Patricia got 20-5 years and, because she was already in her 60s, it was essentially a life sentence. The other 5 individuals involved got sentences ranging from 5 to 15 years. The judge made a point during sentencing to talk about how depraved it was that they'd targeted a family member, someone who trusted them completely, and that they'd planned to institutionalize her to cover their crimes. He said it was one of the most calculated, uncruel cases he'd seen in his 30 years on the bench. I sat in the courtroom and watched them all get sentenced and I felt nothing. Not relief, not satisfaction, nothing. I was empty. The divorce was finalized while David was awaiting sentencing. He tried to fight for custody of Emma, but his attorney told him it was pointless given the circumstances, and he eventually signed away his parental rights. I don't know if he did it because he actually realized what he'd done to us, or if he did it because he didn't want the responsibility of a child he couldn't see for 12 years. Either way, Emma is solely mine now, and he has no legal claim to her. He wrote me one letter from jail that his attorney forwarded to mine. It was 6 pages long, and most of it was him trying to explain that he never wanted it to go this far and that his mother had pressured him into it and that he'd really loved me once before everything got complicated. He said he was sorry and that he hoped I could forgive him someday for Emma's sake. I burned the letter. Patricia wrote me too. Her letter was different. She said I'd ruined her family and destroyed her children's lives and that she hoped I'd suffer every day knowing what I'd done. She said Emma would grow up without a father because of me and that I'd stolen her grandchild from her. She said a lot of other things too. Things about what kind of person I must be to betray family like this. And I stopped reading halfway through and threw it away. Agent Webb told me later that Patricia had been diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder and was convinced, even now, that she was the victim. She'd apparently told her cellmate that I'd seduced David specifically to infiltrate the family and steal their business. Which would have been funny if it weren't so delusional. Rebuilding my life took longer than I thought it would. The FBI helped me get all the fraudulent accounts closed and all the charges removed from my credit report. But my credit was still destroyed because of the inquiries and the time it took to sort everything out. I had to live off savings for months while I waited for my credit to recover enough to rent a decent apartment. The apartment I'd put a deposit on fell through because the landlord got nervous when he Googled my name and found news articles about the case. I eventually found a place that would take me, but it was small and in a not-great neighborhood, and the rent was more than I could comfortably afford. My freelance design business had fallen apart during the investigation because I'd been too distracted to take on new clients, and several existing clients had dropped me when they'd found out about the case. People don't want to work with someone whose identity has been thoroughly compromised, even if it wasn't my fault. I had to start over completely, building a new portfolio and a new client base from scratch. I changed my business name and created new accounts and tried to distance myself from everything that had happened. It worked eventually, but it took almost a year before I was making enough money to feel secure again. The hardest part was dealing with Emma as she got older. For the first couple of years, she was too young to understand that anything was wrong. But eventually she started asking about her father and her grandmother and her aunt. I didn't know what to tell her. How do you explain to a child that her father's family stole your identity and tried to have you committed so they could take her away from you? I talked to a child psychologist who specialized in families affected by crime, and she helped me figure out how to tell Emma appropriate versions of the truth as she grew. For now, Emma knows that her daddy made bad choices and had to go away, and that his family aren't safe people for us to be around. When she's older, I'll tell her more, but I'm dreading that conversation. I had to cut off everyone who'd been connected to David's family. His cousins, his friends from college, his co-workers who I'd gotten friendly with. All of them had to go because I couldn't trust any of them, and I couldn't stand the questions and the judgment. Some of them reached out after the arrest to ask what had really happened and whether I'd known all along. One of David's cousins left me a voicemail saying she'd always thought I was too good to be true and now she knew why, implying that I must have been involved somehow. I blocked everyone and changed my number again and started completely fresh. It was lonely, but it was safer. I started therapy about 6 months after everything ended. I needed help processing the trauma of realizing that my entire marriage had been a lie and that the family I'd thought I'd found had never really existed. My therapist helped me understand that I'd been groomed by Patricia from the very beginning, that she'd identified me as someone vulnerable who was looking for family and belonging, and that she'd weaponized that need against me. She said it wasn't my fault that I'd trusted them, and that normal people don't go through life suspecting that their loved ones are running criminal enterprises. She also helped me work through the guilt I felt about Emma not having a father or grandparents because of my choices, even though logically I knew that David and his family had made their own choices and faced the consequences. The nightmares took about a year to stop. I dreamed that I was being held down while someone took photos of my face, or that I was locked in a white room and no one believed I was really me, or that Patricia had Emma and was walking away with her while I screamed and couldn't move. I'd wake up drenched in sweat and have to check on Emma to make sure she was really there. My therapist said it was PTSD and that it was normal given what I'd been through, but normal didn't make it any easier to deal with. I started taking medication for anxiety and sleeping pills, and slowly things got better. The nightmares became less frequent, and when they did happen, I was able to calm myself down faster. I moved to a different state about 18 months after the arrests. I needed to get away from the area completely. Away from the courthouse and FBI office in the house I'd lived in with David, and the grocery store where I'd run into Lauren that one time before everything came out. I needed to be somewhere that nobody knew my name or my story. I found a job in Denver doing design work for a small marketing firm, and I packed up everything Emma and I owned and drove across the country. We started over in a city where no one knew us and no one had any reason to Google my name or ask questions about Emma's father. Denver was good for us. I made new friends slowly, mostly other single moms from Emma's preschool and daycare. I didn't tell any of them the real story at first. I said Emma's father wasn't in the picture and left it at that. And most people were polite enough not to push. Eventually, I got close enough to a couple of women that I told them the basics. And they were supportive and angry on my behalf and helped me feel less alone. One of them, Sarah, had gone through a bad divorce herself and understood what it was like to rebuild from nothing. She and I became close, and she was the first person I'd trusted completely since everything happened. The FBI closed their investigation into the broader fraud ring about 2 years after the arrests. Agent Webb called to tell me they'd identified over 60 victims and recovered about half of the money that had been stolen, though most of it had already been spent or laundered and was impossible to trace. He said I was one of the lucky ones because I caught it relatively early and had been able to prevent them from doing long-term financial damage to me. Other victims had lost their homes or their retirement savings or had racked up hundreds of thousands of dollars in fraudulent debt that took years to clear. Some victims were still fighting to get their identities back. Agent Webb thanked me again for my cooperation and said the case had been one of the most satisfying of his career because we'd actually gotten justice. I filed a civil lawsuit against Patricia's estate and Lauren and David for damages. My attorney said we'd probably never see any real money because they'd spent or hidden everything, but we won anyway, and I have judgments against all 3 of them for compensatory and punitive damages totaling over $500,000. If any of them ever come into money, I'll be first in line to take it. But I'm not holding my breath. The satisfaction wasn't in the money anyway. It was in having a court of law officially recognize what they'd done to me and declare that I was owed compensation for it. It was validation that I wasn't crazy and hadn't imagined any of it. 3 years after the arrests, I got a call from the prison where Patricia was being held. She'd had a stroke and was in critical condition, and she was asking to see me. The prison chaplain said she wanted to apologize and make peace before she died. I told him no. I had no interest in seeing her or hearing anything she had to say. She'd had 3 years to be sorry, and she'd spent that time writing me hateful letters and telling anyone who'd listen that I was a liar. The chaplain tried to convince me that forgiveness would help me heal, and I told him I'd already healed without her input and hung up. Patricia died 2 days later, and I felt nothing. No relief. No guilt. Nothing. She was just gone, and the world was marginally better for it. David wrote to Emma on her 5th birthday. The letter was sent through his attorney because he wasn't allowed to contact us directly per the restraining order. He said he thought about her every day and wished he could watch her grow up and that he hoped someday she'd understand that he'd made mistakes, but that he loved her. My attorney advised me not to respond and I didn't. Emma doesn't need letters from a man who tried to steal her mother's identity and have her committed to a mental institution. When she's 18, if she wants to contact him, she can make that choice. But I'm not facilitating it. I keep the letters in a box in my closet in case she ever asks. But I hope she never does. Lauren got out of prison after serving 6 years. She immediately violated her parole by trying to contact me through a fake social media account. She sent me a message saying she was sorry and that she'd been young and stupid and had let her mother manipulate her into doing terrible things. She said she'd been in therapy in prison and realized how wrong she'd been and she wanted to make amends. I reported the contact to the FBI and her parole officer and she was sent back to prison for another 2 years. I don't care if she's sorry. Sorry doesn't give me back the years of my life I spent looking over my shoulder and having nightmares and rebuilding everything from nothing. Sorry doesn't undo the damage to Emma, who will grow up without extended family because her father's family were criminals. I still monitor my credit obsessively. I check it every single day and I have alerts set up for everything. I freeze my credit whenever I'm not actively using it and I use different passwords for every single account and I enable every security feature available. I don't use facial recognition anymore and I don't use voice verification and I don't save my fingerprints on any device. I know I'm probably being overly cautious, but I can't help it. The thought of going through something like that again makes me physically ill. My therapist says it's a trauma response and that it's normal, but that eventually I should try to relax my vigilance a little bit because it's exhausting to live like this. She's probably right, but I'm not there yet. Emma is 7 now. She's smart and funny and stubborn and she has no memory of her father or his family. She knows the basic facts in an age-appropriate way. But her childhood is defined by other things now. By her friends and her school and her interests. She wants to be a veterinarian and she loves soccer and she's learning to play piano. She has a normal life and that's all I ever wanted for her. Sometimes people ask her about her dad and she says matter minus of minus, factly that he's in prison because he made bad choices. And then she moves on like it's no big deal. I'm both proud of her resilience and sad that she has to have resilience about something like this at all. I'm 30 minus for now and I still don't know if I'll ever trust anyone enough to get married again. I've gone on a few dates over the past couple of years, but I can't get past the second or third date before I start seeing red flags everywhere. If someone asks too many questions about my finances, I panic. If someone wants to meet Emma too soon, I shut it down. If someone seems too interested in my daily routine or wants access to my phone or my accounts, I block them. My therapist says I'm hypervigilant and that not everyone is out to get me, but she also says that given what I've been through, it's understandable that I'm protective. She says I'll know when I meet someone safe because I'll feel calm instead of anxious. But so far I haven't met that person. I did go on one date that went okay about 6 months ago. His name was Michael and he was a teacher and he had custody of his own daughter from a previous marriage. We had coffee and talked about parenting. He was kind and didn't push when I was vague about Emma's father. We went out a second time and he told me about his ex-wife and how she'd cheated on him and how hard it had been to trust again afterward. I felt like maybe he'd understand if I told him my story. So I did. I told him a simplified version where my ex-husband's family had committed identity theft against me, and I'd helped the FBI build a case against them. Michael listened and seemed sympathetic and said, "That must have been incredibly difficult." Then at the end of the date, he said he didn't think he could handle dating someone with that much baggage and that he hoped I understood. I did understand, but it still hurt. Sarah, my friend from Denver, is the only person I've told the full story to besides my attorney and my therapist. She knows every detail and she's never judged me or made me feel like it was somehow my fault. When I'm having a bad day or a nightmare, or when something triggers me, I call her and she talks me through it. She's become the family I thought I'd found with Patricia. Except she's real and safe and actually cares about me. Her daughter and Dima are best friends and we have dinner together a few times a week and her support has been invaluable. I don't know if I would have made it through the past few years without her. I think about David sometimes and wonder if he thinks about what he did. I wonder if he lies awake in his prison cell and regrets choosing his mother's criminal enterprise over his wife and daughter. I wonder if he ever really loved me, or if I was just a mark from the very beginning. I'll never know the answers to those questions and maybe that's for the best. The David I thought I married never actually existed. He was a character Patricia had helped him create, designed specifically to make me trust him so they could exploit me. The real David is a man who helped his mother steal my identity and plan my institutionalization, and that's not someone I want to understand. I'm also angry a lot still. I'm angry that I lost 3 years of my life to this. I'm angry that I had to rebuild everything from scratch. I'm angry that Emma will never have grandparents who aren't criminals. I'm angry that I can't trust people the way I used to and that every new relationship feels dangerous. I'm angry that Patricia got to die believing she was the victim and that David gets to tell himself he was pressured into it by his mother. I'm angry that Lauren might get out of prison someday and get to live a normal life while I'm still dealing with the aftermath of what she helped do to me. My therapist says anger is part of the healing process and that I shouldn't feel bad about feeling it. But sometimes the anger is so big it scares me. The media attention died down after about a year, but every so often someone writes an article about the case, or it gets mentioned in a cybercustodian blog, or someone does a podcast episode about it. I've been asked to do interviews and I've always said no because I don't want Emma to grow up and find videos of me talking about what her father's family did. I did agree to speak to the FBI for a training video they were making about identifying victims of familial identity theft. But my face was blurred and my voice was disguised and I only talked in general terms about red flags and warning signs. Agent Webb told me that video has helped other agents identify similar cases and potentially saved other victims. And that made me feel like something good had come from all of this. I got a message last year through my attorney from one of the other victims of Patricia's fraud ring. She'd seen my name in court documents and wanted to reach out and thank me for coming forward. She said she'd been trying to figure out why her identity had been compromised for months and hadn't known where to start. And that when the FBI arrested Patricia and the investigation became public, she'd finally had answers. She said knowing it wasn't her fault and that there was a real criminal to blame had lifted this huge weight off her shoulders. She asked if I wanted to meet for coffee and I thought about it but ultimately said no. I didn't want to bond with someone else over shared trauma. I wanted to move forward and not spend time rehashing the past with someone who'd been hurt by the same people. Maybe that makes me a bad person, but I had to protect my own mental health. Hema asked me last month if her dad was a bad person. We were driving home from school and she just came out with it. No preamble. Just that question hanging in the air. I thought carefully about how to answer because I didn't want to lie to her, but I also didn't want to make her feel like she came from bad people. I told her that her dad made very bad choices that hurt a lot of people, including me and her, and that he's in prison because of those choices. I said that people are complicated and that he probably thought he had reasons for what he did, but that his reasons didn't make it okay. She was quiet for a minute and then she asked if she was going to make bad choices like him when she grew up. I pulled the car over and looked at her and told her that she gets to decide who she wants to be and that she's already shown me every day that she's kind and honest and good. She seemed satisfied with that answer. I still have the security camera footage saved from when Patricia broke into my house. I watch it sometimes when I need to remind myself that I wasn't crazy and that everything really happened the way I remember it. I watch her going through my drawers and photographing my documents and typing on my computer, and I feel this mix of rage and vindication. She was so calm and methodical about it, like she'd done it 100 times before and knew exactly what she was looking for. The footage is time-minus, stamped and dated, and completely undeniable. And sometimes when I'm doubting myself or feeling guilty about the way everything turned out, I watch it and remember that I was defending myself against people who wanted to destroy me. I think about alternative timelines sometimes. What would have happened if I hadn't found those photos on David's iPad? What if I'd listened to everyone telling me I was paranoid and crazy and had checked myself into a psychiatric facility voluntarily? What if I'd been weaker or more trusting or less stubborn? I'd probably be exactly where they planned for me to be, locked up somewhere and labeled as mentally ill, while they raised Emma and continued using my identity. Emma would grow up thinking her mother had abandoned her or was too sick to take care of her. I wouldn't have my daughter, and I wouldn't have my freedom, and I wouldn't have my identity. That version of events was so close to happening that it makes me nauseous to think about. I'm also aware that I was lucky in ways that other victims weren't. I had the resources to hire a lawyer. I had the presence of mind to document everything. I found the right FBI agent who took me seriously. I didn't have any mental health history that they could use against me more effectively. I wasn't financially dependent on David in a way that would have made leaving impossible. Other women in similar situations don't have those advantages, and they end up trapped or destroyed or dead. I think about that a lot, and it makes me want to do something to help. But I don't know what. Maybe someday when Emma is older and I've healed more, I'll figure out a way to use my experience to help other people. But right now, I'm still just trying to survive. The house I live in now has an alarm system and cameras covering every entrance. I have a dog, a large German Shepherd named Atlas, who's trained in protection work. I have multiple phones, and I never use biometric security on any of them. I have a safe deposit box at a bank where I keep copies of all my important documents. I have an escape plan and a bug-out bag and cash hidden in places throughout the house. My therapist says these are all reasonable precautions given what I've been through. But Sarah jokes that I'm preparing for the apocalypse. Maybe I am. Maybe after learning that the people closest to you can be your worst enemies, you start preparing for every possible threat. I look at Emma sleeping sometimes, and I think about how close I came to losing her. If Patricia's plan had worked, Emma would have grown up thinking her mother was crazy and her grandmother was a saint. She would have been raised by criminals and would have learned their values and their methods. She might have grown up to be like Lauren, someone who helps her family commit crimes because that's all she knows. Instead, she's growing up with me, learning that standing up for yourself matters and that trust has to be earned in that family isn't always the people you're related to by blood. I hope I'm giving her the tools she needs to protect herself from people like her father's family. David will be eligible for parole in 6 more years. I've already submitted a victim impact statement to the parole board detailing why he should serve his full sentence. And I plan to appear at his parole hearing to make sure he doesn't get out early. My attorney says that given the severity of his crimes and the fact that one of his victims was his own wife, the likelihood of him getting parole on the first try is low. But I'm not taking chances. I want him to serve every single day of his sentence. After that, I don't know what I'll do. I have a restraining order that extends for 10 years after his release, but restraining orders are just pieces of paper. If he wants to find us when he gets out, he probably can. That's something I try not to think about because when I do, I can't sleep. Lauren will be out in a few years, assuming she doesn't violate parole again. I worry about her more than I worry about David because she was always the wild card, the one who was most likely to do something impulsive and stupid. She sent Emma a birthday card last year from prison that was intercepted by the system because of the no-contact order. My attorney got a copy and it was disturbing. All about how she missed Emma and loved her and couldn't wait to meet her someday when she was grown up. She talked about Emma like she was her daughter instead of mine. The prison psychologist who evaluated her said she showed signs of obsessive behavior and boundary issues and recommended she not be granted parole until she'd completed more intensive therapy. I hope they listen. I've spent over $100,000 on legal fees and therapy and security measures and relocation costs. Insurance covered some of it and I won some restitution through the criminal case, but mostly I've just been slowly paying it off. It's worth it to be safe and to have Emma safe and to have my identity back. But there are times when I'm struggling to pay bills and I think about how different my life would be if I'd never met David. I'd probably be married to someone else by now. Someone normal who didn't come from a family of criminals. Emma would have a different father and maybe siblings and definitely grandparents who weren't in prison. I also wouldn't have Emma exactly as she is. And I can't imagine my life without her. So maybe everything happened the way it was supposed to. I don't believe in forgiveness for what they did. I know that's not the narrative people want to hear. They want me to say that I've forgiven David and his family and that I've moved on and that holding on to anger only hurts me. But I haven't forgiven them, and I don't think I ever will. They systematically exploited me for years. They planned to institutionalize me and take my child. They didn't just steal my money or my identity. They tried to steal my mind and my freedom and my daughter. You don't forgive that. You survive it and you move forward, but you don't forgive it. What I have done is build a new life. Emmy and I have routines and traditions that are ours. We have Friday movie nights and Saturday morning pancakes and Sunday park visits. We have holidays that we celebrate our own way without the shadow of David's family hanging over them. We have friends who care about us and who we can trust. We have a home that's safe and secure and that nobody else has keys to. We have each other and we have our future and that's enough. It has to be enough because it's all we have. I still jump sometimes when someone knocks on the door unexpectedly. I still panic when Emma isn't where I expect her to be. I still have moments where I'm absolutely convinced that someone is watching me or following me or planning something. My therapist says these responses will fade more over time, but that I may always have some level of hypervigilance because of what I went through. She says trauma changes your brain and that there's no shame in having lasting effects from something this severe. I'm trying to believe her. The story does have an ending though, even if it's not a happy one. David and his family are in prison where they belong. I have full custody of Emma and a restraining order that protects us. I have a new life in a new city where nobody knows what happened unless I choose to tell them. I have stability and safety in the knowledge that I fought back and won. They tried to destroy me and they failed. They tried to take everything from me and I took their freedom instead. That's not nothing. That's survival and victory and justice all rolled into one messy, complicated package. I think Emma will be okay. She's resilient and loved and she'll grow up knowing that her mother fought for her and protected her no matter what the cost. She'll know that when people show you who they really are, you believe them. And that trust is something that has to be earned and can be lost in an instant. She'll know that family isn't just about blood, but about who shows up for you when things are hard. Those are good lessons even if they came from a terrible situation. Maybe she'll be stronger for it. Or maybe she'll have her own trauma to work through someday. I hope not, but if she does, I'll be there to help her through it the way no one was there to help me. This is my life now. I'm a single mother living under a different name in a different state. Still looking over my shoulder but trying to move forward. I'm a woman who was betrayed by everyone she trusted and who had to become her own hero because no one else would. I'm a survivor of a crime that most people don't even know exists. And I'm still here, and so is my daughter, and that means they lost. It took the FBI and a year minus long investigation and 3 criminal trials and more money than I had. But they lost. I don't know what happens next. I don't know if I'll ever feel completely safe or if I'll ever trust anyone completely again. But I know I'm still standing and they're not. And some days that's enough to keep me going.